Good morning, everyone. First of all, happy Teachers' Day to all my seniors and juniors who have helped me through all these years. The topic for today's lecture is pelvic organ prolapse. So when we talk of prolapse in obstetrics and gynecology, mostly we talk about the uterine prolapse or the protruding out of the uterus. But let me tell you, apart from uterus, there are other pelvic organs also which are of importance, like the bladder and the urethra from the anterior compartment, uterus and cervix of course from the central compartment, and then there is coils of intestine and the rectum in the posterior compartment. So all this is included in pelvic organ prolapse. So if you look at the definition, what is pelvic organ prolapse? It is basically descent of the uterus or the vagina or any other pelvic organ from its normal anatomical position. It is thus a form of hernia. Like you talk in general surgery, there is protruding out of the intestine through the defect in abdominal wall. So similarly, this is a form of hernia. Now, before coming to descent, we should know what is the normal position of the uterus. So, normal position of the uterus is anteflexion and anteversion. So, anteflexion is basically the uterine axis which is flexed upon the cervical axis, and this angle is usually an obtuse angle, 150 to 170 degrees. And then anteversion, that is the angle between the cervical axis and the vaginal axis, which is roughly at right angles or the 90 degree. Normal position of the uterus should lie, that is the internal os of the cervix should lie at the line which is joining the two ischial spines and the line which is joining the symphysis pubis anteriorly and the tip of the sacrum posteriorly. What helps in keeping this uterus and other compartments in the place? So what are the various supports of the uterus that will help in keeping this position? So if you look at the uppermost tier which supports the uterus, we have divided the supports of uterus into three: the upper tier, the middle tier and the lowermost tier. So in the upper one, there is the endopelvic fascia, which covers which is covering the uterus. Then of course there is the round ligament, broad ligaments which are again leaves of peritoneum, and then there are these supports. Basically they are not very strong supports, they are comparatively weaker, but then they do act like a guy rope. Like a guy rope holds the tent together. Similarly, they help in maintaining the position of the uterus, that is the anteversion and anteflexion, but not much of help in preventing the actual descent. Then when you talk about the middle layer, middle is actually the strongest one, the most strong support which is there. Here actually there is all the fibroelastic collar which is surrounding the cervix, hence we call it as a pericervical ring, and it encircles the entire supravaginal part of the cervix. Now cervix has two parts, one is the vaginal part and the other is the supravaginal part. So the supravaginal part in the pelvis is supported by the pericervical ring. Then there are three very important ligaments which are condensations of the endopelvic fascia itself, but they are quite strong and they are the actual ones that hold the uterus in place. So one is the uterosacral ligament, which comes from the sacrum and inserts itself in the lower part of the uterus. Similarly, in the lateral part or the transverse part, you have the transverse cervical ligament, which is also known as the Meckenrod's ligament or the cardinal ligament. And then you have the pubocervical ligament, which lies anteriorly. So this is a diagrammatic representation of all these ligaments. So you can see uterosacral ligaments posteriorly coming from the sacrum, inserting itself into the pericervical ring. Similarly, transverse cervical ligaments and the pericervical ligaments pubocervical ligaments anteriorly. Apart from these ligaments, you have two septum. One is two septa. One is anterior septum and other is the posterior septum. The anterior one is of course between the pubis and the bladder and the cervix, so it is called as the pubocervical septum. And posteriorly you have the rectovaginal septum, that is between the rectum and the vagina. Apart from that, there is other pelvic cellular tissue. Another important structure which is very important is ATFP, which we call it. The full form is arcus tendinous fascia pelvis. Now this is again a strong support. It is a tendinous support. It is formed by thickening of the parietal fascia only. There is the obturator internus muscle which is lining the pelvis from inside. So thickening of this parietal fascia over the obturator internus muscle, and it starts of course from the pubis anteriorly and goes up to the ischial spine postero and laterally. So these are also called as the white lines in the pelvis. So ATFP is again important. Then we come to the inferior most or the lowermost ear. Here what is important is all the pelvic floor muscles. Now what is important is our pelvis itself is deficient inferiorly. Since it is deficient inferiorly, you need to have a very strong and a very robust support which is supporting it from below. So levator ani is that muscle. It is an extremely strong muscle. Though it is a skeletal muscle, it is extremely fatigue resistant. It literally works 24 hours a day. It counteracts all the downward thrust that you have, and even during cases of increased intra-abdominal pressure like coughing, sneezing. Now humans actually, we are bipedal. We have an upright posture unlike the other animals who walk on all fours. Since they are walking on all fours, there is very little question of prolapse, but as we have a standing posture, there is already a gravitational force which is pulling down all our pelvic organs. So this is the levator ani's function to keep these organs in place. Apart from that, you have the perineal body and the perineal muscles. Now perineal body is again formed by contribution of the superficial and the deep perineal muscles, the bulbospongiosus muscle and the sphincter urethrae. And then the fascia which is covering all these layers which ultimately forms the urogenital diaphragm. So all these things constitute your lowermost ear. Now these three tiers and the supports that we talked of were the supports of uterus. Similarly, the vagina needs to be supported. Because when the anterior and the posterior walls of vagina, they are coapted together, it helps in preventing all the pelvic organ prolapse. So the three levels of support of vagina were given by D. Lancey, and they are level 1, level 2 and level 3 supports. Now if you recollect from the previous slides, the cardinal ligaments and the uterosacral ligaments were forming the middle layer or the middle tier of support for the uterus. But for vagina, it is the uppermost. It is the level 1 support. Then level 2 support is the two septum which we were talking about, the pubocervical fascia, anteriorly, and the rectovaginal fascia posteriorly, and the levator ani muscle and its insertion in and the arcus tendinous fascia pelvis. Then the level 3 or the lowermost support, in which there is this perineal membrane and the urogenital diaphragm. So now what is the etiology of pelvic organ prolapse? So like I told you, anatomical factors and gravitational stress is the most important, because we are standing and there is constant pressure and pull by the gravitational force of the earth on the organs in our body. Apart from that, one very important etiological factor is the stress of parturition. Now, if you recollect the mechanism of normal labor, internal rotation has to occur for the presenting part, be it head or be it breech or anything. But internal rotation, it will occur only against the levator ani. The presenting part will come, it will push against the levator ani muscle, and because of the contractions of the uterus and the contraction of the levator ani, the internal rotation would occur to bring the presenting part below the symphysis pubis. So this stress of parturition always causes some wear and tear to the levator ani muscle. Apart from that, in certain cases, there could be inherent weakness in the ligaments and the muscles. There could be myopathy in the muscle or neuropathy in the nerves supplying these muscles. So coming to predisposing factors, like I told you, trauma to the pelvic floor is extremely important. Now this trauma could be actual trauma, or it could be because of trauma of parturition seen in multiparous women. Now if you look at the clinical profile of our patients, most of these patients are multiparous, having many vaginal deliveries, at least 2 or 3. Some of them may also give history of some instrumental vaginal delivery and mainly forceps. Apart from that, most of the patients would be presenting very late, like in 40s, 50s, many times in 60s and 70s after menopause, after many years of menopause. So postmenopausal atrophy and deficiency of estrogen has some role in it. Apart from that, collagen and connective tissue disorders, actually not very important in our patients, but yes, in some cases it may be the case. Then obesity, of course, malnutrition, and scenarios where there is increased intra-abdominal pressure like cough and constipation. Now coming to the types of prolapse. If you look at the types, mainly it is through the vagina. Anterior compartment has the bladder and the urethra. Bladder will come out through the upper 2/3 of the vagina, so it is called as cystocele. Urethra will come from the lower 1/3 of the vaginal wall, anterior vaginal wall, so it is called as urethrocoele. And if both the components are involved, you will have a cystourethrocoele. Similarly, in the posterior compartment or in the through the posterior wall, you will have loops of intestine, enterocoele in the uppermost part and rectocoele below. And the central compartment is the uterus and the cervix itself, so there would be uterine prolapse. Now, very rarely in some patients, the patients would be having either congenital prolapse or nulliparous prolapse. That is, patient have not had any vaginal delivery before. They are nulliparous, they are young, they are of the reproductive age group, and they have the uterus, the vagina prolapsing out together through the central compartment, and sometimes they may also have cervical elongation along with it. Then in cases who have already undergone hysterectomy, there are chances of vault prolapse. So what are the clinical degrees of these prolapse? So you differentiate a situation into mild, moderate and severe. Here you will differentiate it into the first degree, second degree, third degree and a fourth degree. So in first degree, you will have descent of the cervix into the vagina, but not coming out of the vagina. In the second one, the descent of the cervix is so much that it is coming out of the body through the introitus. So that is second degree. It is coming up to the introitus in second degree. In third degree, the cervix would be lying outside the introitus. And in fourth degree, which we also called as procedentia, the whole of the uterus would be coming out, including the fundus, and it would be lying absolutely outside the introitus. Then there is a quantitative grading for the pelvic organ prolapse, which is called as the POPQ classification or the pelvic organ prolapse quantitative grading. So in this POPQ, you need to plot on a paper 9 important points. These 9 important points have been shown in the figure and the grid beside it. So there are 2 points on the anterior wall, which is AA and BA. Similarly, you will have 2 points on the posterior wall, which is AP and BP. P, of course, for posterior, and point A and point B. And Then you will have the level of the cervix, which is marked by C, the posterior fornix, which is marked by D, and the total vaginal length, which is marked by TVL. Then you have to measure the length of the genital hiatus, which is called as GH, and then you have to measure the perineal body, which is PB. So what are these points? Now if you look at point AA and AP, the points A are fixed points. They are going to lie at 3 centimeters only. They will lie 3 centimeters proximal to the hymen on the posterior vaginal wall in case of AP, and in case of AA, they will lie 3 centimeters proximal to the external urethral meatus on the anterior vaginal wall. C and D, I told you, D is the posterior fornix and C is the cervical, the edge of the cervix. GH is the diameter of the genital hiatus and PB is the width of the perineal body. TVL is total vaginal length. Now, all those points which are lying proximal to the hymen, okay, they would be recorded as negative numbers, like -2 centimeter, -3 centimeter, like that. And if a point lies outside the hymen, distal to the hymen, it would be positive, like +1, +2. And then you have the grading or staging of this POPQ. So here you have one extra stage which is 0, but of course 0 is no descent of the pelvic organ, and then 1, 2, 3 and 4. So 1 would be when the prolapse is still inside the hymenal ring and it remains at least 1 centimeter above the hymenal ring. Stage 2 is 1 centimeters above and below to the hymen. 3 is 1 centimeter beyond the hymen, more than 1 centimeter. And 4th is, like I told you, complete eversion of vagina, which is procedentia. So this is again the diagrammatic representation of all the 4 stages. Stage 0 is the normal stage where there is no descent. If you see at the lower green line, it is representing the level of the hymenal ring. So stage 1 is, and then you have to measure -1 and +1 above and below the ring. So this is a figure of a clinical picture of how procedentia looks like. Now coming to symptoms and complaints. The patient usually presents to us in OPD with this common complaint of something coming out per vaginum. Apart from that, there is backache, there is dragging pain because all the structures are being pulled out, so there is dragging pain. There is dyspareunia. There may be urinary signs and symptoms like difficulty in micturition. Many times patients are able to pass urine only after they have digitally lifted and reposited the entire swelling inside. Then there could be a component of urinary tract infection. There could be urgency, frequency, dysuria. All this because of the loss of the angle between the urethra and the bladder. So it could also lead to stress urinary incontinence. That is when the patient laughs, patient cries, there is involuntary micturition. Or if there is a blocking of the bladder neck, there is retention of urine. Similarly, in bowel symptoms, there could be difficulty in defecation, rarely incontinence. Stress urinary incontinence is common, but bowel incontinence is not a very common complaint. And then there could be excessive whitey or bloody discharge per vaginum due to vaginitis, cervicitis, or because of formation of a decubitus ulcer. If there is a procedentia which is lying outside for a long time, which is unattended, then there would be ulceration of the mucosas and there would be formation of decubitus ulcer. And then, of course, discharge and foul smelling discharge from the ulcer. So what could be the complication? If you leave these conditions, especially the stage 3, stage 4 conditions unattended, there could be incarceration or obstruction, difficulty in repositing them back, so difficulty in passing urine and stool. There could be recurrent urinary tract infection and peritonitis. There could be decubitus ulcer like we talked about, and extremely rarely these ulcers may turn malignant, but the possibility is very rare. So how do you diagnose? This condition is basically does not require any fancy investigations, CT scan karao, MRI karao, nothing like that. It is essentially clinical. You examine the patient clinically and you can find out that this is a case of prolapse. You need to do a general examination always for any patient to see for the general well-being of the patient. Apart from that, to rule out any systemic diseases. So general examination. Then coming to local examination, you need to examine the patient twice. Once in dorsal lithotomy position and then in standing position. So basically the patient should be at their original position, and then again the patient should be examined on complete straining. So cystorectocele through the bulge in vaginal wall you can find out. Uterine descent you can make out. Laxity of the perineum, gaping introitus would be some of your positive findings. Then you have to check for the levator ani muscle tone. Now how do you do that? You place your index finger and the middle finger inside the vagina and the thumb has to lie outside the vagina. You have to palpate this muscle along the lower 1/3 of the vagina and then you have to ask the patient to squeeze. So by that, in this manner, you can find out whether the muscle is contracting enough, whether the tone is good or not. Then what are the differential diagnosis of this condition? Very often when you have a huge cystocele anteriorly, it may be confused with a Gartner's cyst. Gartner's cyst again is a cyst in the anterior vaginal wall which may look like a cystocele, but what you have to understand is cyst is a tense structure. It is non-reducible structure and there would be no cuff impulse because it is not a form of hernia. Then there would be elongated cervix. Many times the uterine body is normal, it is in its normal position, but it is only the cervix that has become elongated and that is coming out. So elongation of cervix with a normal placed uterus is to be ruled out. Then there is inversion of the uterus, that is the uterus becomes inside out and tries to come out through the cervical rim and through the vagina. So here what you need to understand is that on the leading part of the inverted uterus, there would be no opening or there would be no cervical canal seen. Similarly, there would be a rim-like structure which is present around the mass, which is the cervical rim. Then very rarely there could be a fibroid polyp. A fibroid which the uterus is trying to expel out, so it takes a form of a polyp. So you can see a pedicle which is coming out through the canal. Now how do you manage a case of pelvic organ prolapse? First and foremost, prevention is always better than cure. So what you need to take care is when a young lady of a reproductive age group comes for vaginal delivery, you try to avoid trauma as far as possible. Do instrumental delivery only and only in indicated cases. Don't be gentle with the patient. Allow all the stages of labor, allow all the steps to get completed on their own. Just try to prevent any complications, but don't do too much of interventions. That would help a lot. In postnatal period, especially for the vaginal deliveries, tell the patient to ambulate as early as possible. They do not require a prolonged bed rest, so they can start walking quickly. Encourage them to have pelvic floor exercises. The most important pelvic floor exercise for us is Kegel's exercise. In Kegel's exercise, basically you just have to squeeze pelvic floor muscles on and off. Then for postmenopausal patients, start HRT for all the indicated cases. Especially the topical application of vaginal estrogen cream is very important. correct any condition like cough, constipation, and avoid any strenuous exercises. Then there is some conservative management and there is operative intervention. So if you, what are the candidates or when is conservative management indicated? Conservative management is indicated for all the asymptomatic patients, women who are pregnant as of now, or they are lactating mothers who would not like to go a surgical intervention as of now. So you can manage them conservatively for the meanwhile. Milder degrees of prolapse, which can be managed by providing them good physiotherapy, Kegel's exercise, improving their generalized condition. Or in very elderly patient where because of their medical comorbidities, surgery is contraindicated, or while you are preparing the patient for the surgery and you have some time for posting those patients for surgery. So meanwhile you can advise the conservative management. So if we talk about conservative management, one is improving the generalized condition, giving them Kegel's exercise, and then there is another important thing which is called as a pessary. Pessary is not a cure of prolapse, but of course it will relieve all your signs and symptoms basically, because now patient would not have to reposit back the uterus on her own, the bladder and the urethra on her own, so urine passage of urine and stool becomes easier. So how do these pessaries act? Pessary, they take their support from the levator ani muscle. They support the uterus by resting itself on the two sides of the levator ani, and the levator ani would act like a shelf for providing the support to the pessary. Now pessaries are usually ring-shaped structure. Most commonly we use the ring pessary. But apart from that, you can have other forms of pessaries like in the form of a donut, or in the form of a circular plate, or in the form of a cube. So whichever is comfortable to the patient, you can advise the same. Now, whenever you advise pessary to the patient, determining the size and the diameter of the ring pessary is very important, because every patient would require a different size. So you should give the accurate, appropriate size to the patient. So how will you measure this diameter? You will do it by doing a pervaginal examination. The diameter of the pessary should be equivalent to the distance between the lower border of the symphysis pubis and the posterior fornix. So that way you can find out the diameter. Now what are the limitations of pessary? Pessary needs to be changed frequently. And then there are other, the compliance of the patient and relative is very important. The patient should come to you for follow-up. You should examine the vagina for any erosions, any ulcerations. Compliance is important. Complications, there could be discomfort because of a foreign organ in the, foreign object in the vagina. So patient might feel discomfortable. There could be vaginitis, there could be cervicitis, there could be erosion and there could be ulcerations, bleeding from these erosions. And if the diameter of the, if the pessary is too tight, it could lead to urinary retention. Then coming to surgical management. Now if we talk about the surgeries, there are broadly classified into four categories. One are the restorative procedures. Restorative procedures means you correct all the ligaments that the patient has. Whichever ligaments are lax, you plicate them, try to shorten them, try to strengthen them. You try to plicate the muscles together, take muscle stitches and make them strengthen. Try to plicate the fascia. So you try to restore whatever anatomical defect that is there. Then there are compensatory procedures where you use grafts or you use Prolene mesh like you use in hernia surgeries, and then you try to compensate the defect of your original organs with the help of grafts. Then there is extirpative procedures. Extirpative procedures mainly include hysterectomy, because elderly patients who are 60, 70 years old, they would say you remove the uterus and then you may correct all the supporting tissue. So they prefer hysterectomy. And then there are obliterative procedures where you completely obliterate, completely close the vagina so that there is no genital hiatus and there is no pelvic organ prolapse through that hiatus. So those surgeries are called as colpocliasis. Then for repairing the cystocele and the urethrocoele anteriorly, the surgery which we perform is anterior colporrhaphy. Where what you do is, first of all, you infiltrate the vaginal mucosa with saline. After infiltration with saline, you try to mobilize, you incise and mobilize the bladder. You try to push up the bladder, dissect out all the endopelvic fascia and the pubocervical fascia, then plicate them or buttress them together. And then whatever extra lax anterior vaginal wall is there, you cut it out and you close the incision. Similarly, for rectocele posteriorly, what you have is a posterior colpoperineurrhaphy. So anteriorly it is colporrhaphy, posteriorly it is colpoperineurrhaphy, because you need to correct the lax perineum also. Similarly, for enterocele, which is coming from the upper 1/3 of the posterior vaginal wall, you may take a vaginal approach or you may take an abdominal approach. In vaginal approach, that is, if you correct it vaginally, it is called as the Meckel's skuldoplasty. And if you correct it abdominally, it is called as the Moskowitz repair. So this is the diagrammatic representation of enterocele, repair of the enterocele. First you infiltrate, you incise the mucosa, you separate the mucosa, you separate the bladder, push the bladder up, then you take the stitches along the, you buttress all the pelvic fascia and the pubocervical fascia. Once the fascia has been plicated, you cut off the lax vaginal wall which is there and close the vaginal mucosal sutures. Similarly, like I told you, elderly patients with uterine descent, they prefer a vaginal hysterectomy. In cases of prolapse, always vaginal hysterectomy is better than abdominal hysterectomy. Vaginal hysterectomy has complication rate much lower than abdominal surgery. So always you should go for a vaginal hysterectomy. Recovery is also very faster in these patients because literally there is no incision on the abdomen or anywhere else. But the question comes when the patient is nulliparous. Patient wants to conserve the uterus because childbearing is still pending. These patients are young, they are in their 20s, they want to have children, so they want to preserve their uterus. So for them, you need to take an abdominal approach. It can be done laparoscopically as well in the modern times. Through abdominal incision or through the laparoscopic incision, you can do a sling surgery where you put in a sling on the anterior part of the uterus and the cervix, the uterocervical junction, and then pull the uterus up with the help of that sling. Another important surgery is a Fothergill's operation, which is done in younger patients. But Fothergill's operation is typically important for those patients in which there is lot of cervical elongation apart from descent. So whenever there is this cervical elongation, you will have to do some amount of cervical amputation. That is, you cut off a rim of cervix so that you shorten it. So Fothergill's operation has 5 important steps. One is you do DNC, you rule out any malignancy or any other endometrial or cervical pathology. After that, you do the cervical amputation, you do the plication and strengthening of the Meckel's rods, bring them and tie them in front of the cervix, do the anterior colporrhaphy for the anterior wall defect, and do posterior colpoperineurrhaphy posteriorly. So these 5 steps are included in the Fothergill's operation. Then in cases in which they have undergone hysterectomy earlier, many patients, they undergo hysterectomy due to some condition in their early 30s or 40s at a comparatively younger age. Later on in their 60s and 70s, it might happen that the vault of the vagina is protruding out now. The uterus cervix is of course not there, but the vault which is there, that would try to bulge out and come out through the hiatus. So that is what is vault prolapse. So vault prolapse, essentially, it is better if you correct it abdominally. Abdominally, what you have to do is take an abdominal incision, mobilize the vault, and tie it up with the sacrum posteriorly. So it is called as the sacrocolpopexy. Then you have very elderly patients who are not very fit for prolonged surgeries, who have lot of comorbid conditions. They can undergo a simple procedure which is called as a colpocliasis, which is also called as the Lefort's operation. In this, what you do is, on the vaginal mucosa, just you denude rectangular flaps on the anterior and the posterior wall. Oppose these freshly created flaps, and then obliterate the complete vagina. So the vaginal hiatus is closed, and then there would be no protrusion or no prolapse of organs outside. So that brings us to the end of this lecture. I have not discussed the steps of hysterectomy much in details. So that's